Hello, everyone, and welcome back to World History with Miss King, your favorite student teacher of all time. Today, we'll be going over manorialism. This is a follow-up on our previous lecture, feudalism, and gets a little bit more into the life of peasants and serfs. But before we jump into that, make sure you have your fill-in-the-blank notes open. They should say 9.2 manorialism notes at the top and look like this. Make sure you make a copy and turn it into Google Classroom for a grade. Also, make sure you turn in this feudalism exit ticket. It'll count as a participation grade along with the fill in the blank notes from the feudalism section. This will also just help you prepare for the test and succeed in this unit. And be on the lookout for an early Middle Ages vocabulary quiz, which I will be posting on Google Classroom soon. But you do have your vocabulary is all due on the 21st. So the vocab quiz will be on the 28th, just so you guys can plan ahead. But let's go ahead and get started. This is a relatively short slideshow, so stick with me and make sure you're paying attention. Keep your arms and your feet in the ride at all times. Here we go. So manorialism. We see a great big castle over here in this picture, and then we see some not so lucky folks over here having to farm all and take care of all that land. So remember to make sure you pay attention to the highlighted words as they will be the words you need for the fill in the blanks on your notes. But starting with the manor system and looking back into what we kind of touched on in feudalism, but a little bit more in depth now with manorialism, we have knights and them receiving a fief. And if you remember what a fief is, shout that out now or think of it in your head. But a fief is a plot of land. So when knights received a plot of land from his lord, he needed a way to farm it as he didn't have time for this land with all the constant warfare and battling between lords. So there were peasants, and these were farmers that didn't own any land of their own. And so a new economic system known as the manor system developed out of this need. The knights allowed peasants to farm land on their estates, and in returns, peasants had to give knights the food they grew. They got to keep some of it, but they had to give knights some of it as a way to say thank you for giving them some land to farm to begin with. And a large estate owned by a knight was called a manor. But remember, knights could also be a lord, so these terms are sometimes interchangeable. So don't forget that. Continuing on with peasants, serfs, and other workers, we have the fact that most medieval lords kept about a fourth to a third of their land for themselves. The rest they divided up among the peasants and serfs. Serfs were workers who were tied to the land. So, unlike peasants, they could not leave the land without permission from the Lord. They weren't a slave, but they weren't particularly free. They spent most of their time working the land, and in return, they got a small plot to farm for themselves in protection against outlaws. So, again, the Lord could give a peasant or a serf land, and that became an overarching agreement to provide protection with that lord's knights. And same thing for a knight that gave a land to a peasant was also considered that peasant's lord. Manors produced and provided everything the people that needed lived there. This can be called self-sufficient. Today, we can look at like societies such as the Amish and how they are really more drawn back from society. That could be compared to a more self-sufficient style of living, where they raise their own meat, farm their own crops, create their own clothing, oftentimes, and that's exactly how the manor system worked. Manor lords. So the lords of the manor controlled everything that happened on his land. Remember, the serfs had to get permission from the lord to even leave the land and go into town. His word was ultimately the law. So when in the time of the medieval period, when there were no laws and regulation, the manor lord's word was the law. He punishes those who misbehave and collected taxes from those that lived on his manor. So ultimately, he was the head honcho. And since it's Women's History Month, looking at women in the Middle Ages, they generally had less power than men and had to obey the wishes of their husbands and fathers. I'm not sure we're really surprised by that fact, giving the time period. And if anyone, I'm going to say, if anyone can tell me, sends me the year of when women got the right to vote, you will get an extra 5 points on the vocab quiz. So if you're listening and paying attention, there's a little bonus for you all. If you tell me the year women gained the right to vote in the United States, then you can get a little bonus on the vocab quiz. That's just a fun little tidbit, especially since it's Women's History Month and we're talking about how little power women in the Middle Ages had. So, Eleanor of Aquitaine, talking about women of the Middle Ages and how little power they had, let's talk about one of the most powerful women in the Middle Ages, which was Eleanor of Aquitaine. She ruled an area of France known as Aquitaine, given in the name. And she did this as a king's envoy. She married Louis, oh goodness, Louis the Seventh. I have to remember Roman numerals too, you guys. It's definitely been a minute. So excuse me, but I think that is 7, and became Queen of France. Later, she divorced Louis and married Henry II. I do know those Roman numerals. She married Henry II and became the Queen of England. 2 of her sons would later become the kings of England. So it's really just showing her legacy as a woman during the Middle Ages and how much power she had. Of course, a lot of that power came through marriage, but even the fact that she ruled Aquitaine as a king's envoy is pretty impressive for this time period. So the last slide, we're talking about the Middle Ages. It's not a great time to be alive, but comparatively to what they would see very soon with the Crusades and the plague, which some of you may know as the Black Death, this time period wasn't too bad. And as you can see, as in this chart on the side, we see a kind of a growth of population. So most people lived on manors and cities were small. But around the thousands, cities started to grow because Europe's population started to grow, like we were just mentioning. And this is mostly because was more food. And a lot of those Germanic nomadic tribes we were talking about were no longer nomadic. They started converting from paganism, which is something a lot of people missed on the pretest. But a lot of the Germanic tribes were pagan before converting to Christianity. But since they had established this sense of religion and this sense of like conquest and wanting to become more sedentary, they quit traveling as much. And so the population overall started to grow. And new farming technology came into the picture, like heavier plows and horse collars. And this allowed farmers to use horses instead of oxen, which oxen were bigger and slower to plow the fields. Oxen were basically buffalo, so massive, very slow, stubborn. But horses you could somewhat train and allow them to farm the fields with a bit more ease. So that is it for this early Middle Ages unit, you guys. You guys will have a review game through Book It, again, like the Islam unit to be looking out for. Don't forget the vocabulary quiz, which will be due the 28th, as well as both of your fill in the blank notes. Your recruitment and wanted poster are due the 21st, as well as that manorialism and feudalism vocab, which you have a video instruction for. So unless you have any other questions or concerns to email me with at kingb@ameliaschools.com. This is Miss King signing off and wishing you farewell. Have a great one, you guys.